Where exactly are my Bitcoins?
Well, some people aren't going to like this, but Bitcoins don't exist. This is a kind of mind-blowing perspective that I've arrived upon, because really what does exist is the time chain of blocks. Inside those blocks, there's a bunch of messages that we call transactions. Those transactions describe amounts of sats moving from one address to another, but the reality is nothing moves.
Hi everyone, welcome to Ask a Bitcoiner 21 Questions. I'm your host, Saida Gomez. The theme of this 10-minute episode is Bitcoin philosophy. And here to answer 21 questions is TC from Timechain Calendar. TC, how are you?
Wonderful. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And just a reminder to the audience that you will see a Cashu QR code pop up somewhere in this segment. If you're the first to scan it, the 2100 sats are yours, and TC will be asked one seed word. So pay close attention, because when you watch his full interview, you'll see more seed words. And of course, the first person to find all 12 seed words and sweep the wallet will win 21,000 sats. So good luck. Before I start the timer, can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, I am the creator of Timechain Calendar. It's a website at timechaincalendar.com, and it's also a mobile app on the App Store and the Google Play Store at Timechain Calendar. I've been in Bitcoin since 2017. I've been kind of taking it seriously and studying and trying to really understand it on a deeper level since late 2019, early 2020. And I'm thrilled that I feel like I have this app to contribute to the community out there and help people heighten their Bitcoin awareness and understanding.
Yeah, your proof of work is beautiful. So, okay, are you ready? I'm going to start the timer soon.
I'm ready.
First question. Through which lens do you primarily view Bitcoin? Philosophy, economics, or technology?
Well, that's so tough. I think it changes day to day. I think on days when the market is ripping, I'm honestly looking at it economically, like many people. But I think most of the time I am looking at it as a philosophical thing that really does impact my life in a deeper way. The sort of pursuit of truth and the focus on signal has impacted parts of my life well outside of Bitcoin. So I'd say that's the primary focus. And then also, with my project and what I do with code, it's impossible not to also really relate to Bitcoin on the technology level. So sorry, I think all three is the answer.
All of the above. Which of your assumptions has Bitcoin shattered?
I think the assumption that the world was the way that I thought it was most of my adult life, that's been a game changer. I think you pull on the threads of the monetary system being so deceitful and so just kind of evil. I think once you recognize the trade-offs with that monetary system in comparison to Bitcoin, and you start moving closer to Bitcoin, it's really easy to start pulling on other threads. So I think that's the impact.
How has Bitcoin changed you?
Well, I think that it's made me a lot more skeptical. I think I'm a real skeptic when it comes to most things in the world. I've really taken the don't trust, verify concept to heart. And that's actually had some really positive impacts. I feel like my health is one of the things I'm most excited about, that I've improved a lot over these last several years. And I think that's distinctly because of being involved in Bitcoin.
What's the difference between privacy and secrecy?
Secrecy is something where you really need exclusivity around information. And privacy is, I think, really a kind of veil that you can attempt to maintain and stay behind and share with other people. It's a nuanced thing, but I think that especially in today's day and age where we're online and sharing so much information through the internet, privacy is a conscious framework that you have to adopt in almost everything you do, whereas secrecy is really a kind of a security thing as far as certain information that you require to be exclusively yours.
Where exactly are my Bitcoins?
Well, some people aren't going to like this, but Bitcoins don't exist. This is a kind of mind-blowing perspective that I've arrived upon, because really what does exist is the time chain of blocks. Inside those blocks, there's a bunch of messages that we call transactions. Those transactions describe amounts of sats moving from one address to another, but the reality is nothing moves. Bitcoin is a state machine. Every new block with new transactions just sort of updates what we call the UTXO set, which is the list of spendable chunks of Bitcoin, UTXOs. So UTXOs exist, the UTXO set exists, these transactions listed in blocks exist, but Bitcoins, they don't exist.
Where does the Bitcoin ledger exist?
On every machine that's running the Bitcoin software. Running Bitcoin is basically running the Bitcoin software on a computer, and the first thing that your node will do when you start running Bitcoin software is it will download the entire time chain of transactions.
Which Bitcoin is the real Bitcoin?
I think that what we commonly know as BTC is the real Bitcoin. There's been an unbelievable amount of forks and copies of Bitcoin over the years. Really, there's kind of two ways to look at it. One way is what's the longest chain, because we do have sort of chain splits all the time with orphan blocks. But there's a lot of groups of people out there that will try to convince you that Bitcoin BTC is not Bitcoin and that some of these other forks were really the real intention. I think that the market and the population of planet Earth has spoken. I think it's pretty clear which Bitcoin is the real Bitcoin.
How do we know what happened in Bitcoin and the order in which it happened?
So the time chain takes care of that. We have this system of competition between miners to decide who has the right to add the latest block. The miner that wins this right gets to choose which transactions they're going to put in out of all the unconfirmed transactions that are available. And that system creates an authoritative sequence of events. Each of these blocks is timestamped, and there's a clear order to them. And so over time, what happens in Bitcoin, we can relate directly to what block height things happened at, and the time chain does function as an authoritative sequence.
What is the time chain?
The time chain is this chain of blocks that have this authoritative sequence because proof of work has been added to the equation. Without proof of work, you could have a blockchain that is not an authoritative sequence, because you could have a way to change the order of the blocks or any information in the blocks. It's one of these things that's, again, takes some study to look at the combination of factors. But the time chain really is manifested in Bitcoin, where we do have this system of proof of work mining, and we have this network of nodes that have been for 17 years now keeping track of this sequence of blocks. And so far it's working pretty well.
What is an unspent transaction output, or UTXO?
Whenever a Bitcoin transaction is confirmed in a block, it describes outputs. Most transactions might have one output. but a transaction can have any number of outputs, and each of those outputs are describing an amount of Bitcoin going to a new address. And basically, a UTXO is, I conceptually think of it as like a chunk of sats. So however many sats are going to a particular address, you can think of those sats being located at that address. But then that goes back to the Bitcoins don't exist thing. Really what exists is just the description about it, and nothing actually moved, but the UTXO set will keep track of, it's a list of basically all of those unspent Bitcoins, or maybe a better word is spendable Bitcoins, because then as soon as one is spent, it's no longer in that list of spendable outputs, and then it's not able to be spent anymore.
What's the difference between blockchain and timechain?
So a blockchain is this structure of information that's linked one block to the next, where the next block has the hash of the header before it, and so on and so forth, so that you have a data structure that has that sort of immutability potential. The time chain is actually how Satoshi referred to it in his early writings. He didn't use the word blockchain, he used the word time chain. And on the other hand, a lot of sort of clowns, in my opinion, have used the word blockchain to exhaustion in the world over the last decade or so, to where I distinctly prefer to call it a time chain instead of calling it a blockchain, because I think that really is a distinction around Bitcoin's characteristics and around the way that Satoshi characterized what was happening there.
How does Bitcoin achieve digital scarcity even though the ledger is copied everywhere?
That comes back to that UTXO set I was talking about, this list of the spendable chunks of Bitcoin. Because as long as all of the nodes running the Bitcoin software have consensus about that UTXO set, every time a new transaction is broadcast by a participant on the network and put into a block, it's trivial for any node to be able to say this transaction is valid or not. Has that chunk of Bitcoin been spent before or not? And only if it is spendable, then it gets spent. And if it gets spent, it's not spendable anymore in the future. So it's a very airtight system. There's not really a way to double spend in this system.
How big is 128-bit security?
Really, really, really big. I mean, I've heard this described so many ways. You've got the grains of sand in the universe, and you've got the atoms in the grains of sand in the universe. So yeah, I mean, this is a problem, is human beings don't really do a good job of thinking about big numbers. It's actually one of the cool things in that Cryptography Is Not Enough video with Dare Gigi. He talks about the grains of rice on the chessboard, and it's really amazing when you start thinking about how big these numbers are. So it's basically the tiniest needle in the most universally huge haystack. 128-bit is very incredibly secure with conventional computing, and 256-bit is even more.
How feasible is it for a supercomputer to brute force private keys?
Well, so using the conventional computing methods, you're running into constraints of time, energy. I mean, it's literally the lifespan of the universe is the kind of time frames you're talking about. So it's really not feasible, especially in the context of human lifetimes and sort of this short attention span way that we live today.
Yeah. Is quantum computing a genuine threat to Bitcoin?
So I'm not an expert on this topic, but my understanding is that it's not really about quantum computing breaking certain encryption. Bitcoin it more relies on sort of the one directionality of hashing, and so it's your public key getting sort of reversed into a private key that is the real vulnerability. The earliest forms of Bitcoin addresses actually were just the public key in the raw sitting there. So the real answer about quantum computing is that certain addresses, and typically it's the earlier ones, are more vulnerable in theory. Quantum computing, though, does run into the same issues of time, energy, and because of quantum computing, they also run into problems with error correction and stability of the activity that's going on. So you combine all these things, and there's potential threats to certain addresses, some unknown distance in the future, and I am encouraged knowing that I'm not holding any sats on any of those old address types. And also, there's a ton of Bitcoiners that are actively working on interesting, compelling solutions to some of these things, so I'm not really worried about it long term.
Why can Bitcoin be understood as speech?
I think the framework of code as speech is the primary way to look at that. In the end, it's all text. It's all written words. Code is just words written down. When we use Bitcoin or you make a transaction, you're literally creating a text message and you're sending it to the network. So I believe from that point of view, free speech applies pretty solidly. And then there's another aspect of using money as speech. You kind of like walk with your wallet, right? You vote with your wallet. You kind of use your money to express where you see value and where you want to transact as a human being. So I think there's free speech aspects of that activity as well.
Does the First Amendment apply to Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just kind of outlined two primary ways where we can look at it as speech, and I think it's debatable how much we have the First Amendment really working these days. But Bitcoin being a permissionless network, I think that kind of revives certain aspects of the First Amendment that are kind of compromised in other areas of our life.
Was Bitcoin created by the CIA?
No, I don't think so at all. I think there's a lot of real obvious aspects of Bitcoin that I just struggle to see how the CIA as an organization was behind its creation. I also, as a software engineer myself, I understand firsthand what it's like to actually build software and use these different pieces that were created before. Satoshi used an extraordinary number of sort of building blocks, innovations that were done by other people long before he was working on Bitcoin. And it really does strike me that it's an individual that did this. If it was a group of people, it would have been, I think, a very small group of people collaborating. I do not believe this was a project by a government organization.
What is Bitcoin's moral code?
I am going to borrow from Dare Gigi and say, you shall not steal. I think that's the profound morality of Bitcoin's code. I think when it comes to money and monetary systems, we're living in a fiat world where it's just seemingly endless, the ways that people can steal, the way that people can manipulate, and the rigidity of Bitcoin's rules that do not allow double spending, that only allow transactions that are signed by a valid private key to be valid. These eliminate most of the shenanigans that human beings find in traditional money systems. So just simply by the code operating correctly, there's a ton of immoral activity that's just impossible to do on this system.
Yep. Fill in the blank. Bitcoin is?
A spork.
A spork. I wasn't expecting that. Last question. The White Rabbit in Alice in Wonderland plays this unintentional role in Alice's journey?
It's kind of the signal. It's the mystery. It's unknown. The white rabbit is what Alice is constantly chasing after. And every time she sees the white rabbit, it's kind of shaking her out of the distraction that she's got stuck in and reminding her of which way to go. That's the way I see it.
And that is the last question. The last question was actually a hint for the seed word. So audience, you heard him, you sort of go through and figure out whether that is indeed a seed word. Thank you so much, TC, once again, for answering 21 questions. Can you remind people where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. This was so much fun. Thanks for having me. You can check out Timechain Calendar at timechaincalendar.com. Also on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, the app simply called Timechain Calendar. You can find the project on X Twitter at TimechaincAl, C-A-L, and also on Nostr. You can use the Nippo5, which is TC at timechaincalendar.com to find the Nostr profile there. Follow along and enjoy Timechain Calendar, a little bit of Bitcoin awareness in your life.
Thank you, TC.
Cheers.